The sound of gunshots echoed through the morning air as Grace Winters ran through the thick underbrush of the Colorado wilderness, her heart pounding like a stampede of wild horses. She clutched her small leather satchel, all that remained of her former life, as thorny branches tore at her once fine blue calico dress, now muddied and torn from 3 days on the run. Wyoming Territory, 1876. The promise of a new life had turned into a nightmare. "There she is!" a gruff voice called out behind her. "Don't let her get away!" Grace's lungs burned as she pushed deeper into the forest. Harrison Wells wouldn't let her escape easily, not after she'd witnessed him murder that poor miner in cold blood, and especially not after she'd grabbed the deed to her father's land before fleeing. The land Harrison had schemed to steal through their arranged marriage, the land that held more gold than her father had ever realized. Her foot caught on a hidden root, sending her tumbling down a ravine. Pain shot through her ankle as she landed hard, but the sounds of pursuit drove her onward. She limped toward a clearing, desperate for any path to safety. The trees opened to reveal a dirt road. And there, like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to speak, was a weathered wagon pulled by 2 dappled horses. A tall man stood beside it, loading supplies. "Help!" she gasped, stumbling forward. "Please help me!" The man turned, revealing a face weathered by sun and wind beneath a wide-brimmed hat. His eyes, startlingly blue against his tan skin, widened at the sight of her. "Madam?" His voice was deep, concerned. "They're coming," Grace managed between ragged breaths. "They'll kill me!" She heard shouts in the distance, growing closer. The stranger's gaze flicked toward the forest, then back to her. Without hesitation, he lifted her into the wagon, covering her with a rough woolen blanket. "Stay still," he whispered, then moved to the front of the wagon. Grace trembled beneath the scratchy fabric, listening as horses approached. "You there? Seen a woman come this way? Brown hair, blue dress?" Harrison's voice, slick with false charm. "Ain't seen nobody but jackrabbits all morning," the stranger replied evenly. "Something wrong?" "Just a misunderstanding with my fiancé. Got herself worked up over nothing." "That so?" The stranger's tone remained neutral. "Well, good luck finding her. I'm headed to Willow Creek if you need an extra set of eyes." A tense moment passed before Harrison spoke again. "We'll keep searching the woods." She couldn't have gotten far. The sounds of horses retreated, but Grace remained frozen in place. Minutes later, the wagon shifted as the stranger climbed onto the driver's bench. With a gentle command to the horses, they began moving. Only when they traveled some distance did he speak. "They're gone now. You can come out." Grace pushed the blanket aside, blinking in the harsh sunlight. Her rescuer kept his eyes on the road. "Thank you," she said. "You saved my life. Couldn't leave a lady in distress." He glanced back at her. "Name's Caleb Murphy. Ranch hand at the Triple R outside Willow Creek." "Grace Winters." She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. I need to get as far from Harrison Wells as possible." "The man back there?" "Your fiancé," he said. "Not by choice," Grace said bitterly. "My father arranged it before he died last month. I didn't know what kind of man Harrison was until—" She closed her eyes, seeing again the miner's lifeless body, the cold calculation in Harrison's eyes as he turned toward her. "He's not who he pretends to be." Caleb nodded, asking no further questions. "Willow Creek's about 4 hours from here. You're welcome to ride along. After that." He shrugged. "Stagecoach comes through every Tuesday heading west." Grace touched her ankle, wincing at the pain. "I don't have money for a stagecoach. I don't have much of anything. Let's get to town first," Caleb said, his voice kind but practical. Problems have a way of looking different after a hot meal and a good night's rest. As the wagon trundled down the rutted road, Grace studied her rescuer. Caleb Murphy was tall and broad-shouldered, with strong hands that held the reins confidently. His clothes were worn but clean, faded blue shirt, leather vest, dusty trousers tucked into well-used boots. No wedding band. Perhaps 30 years old, with light brown hair that curled slightly at his collar, and a neatly trimmed beard that did little to hide a scar running along his jawline. He caught her looking and offered a small smile. Your ankle bothering you? There's a canteen of water under the seat if you're thirsty. Grace found the canteen, grateful for his consideration. The water was cool and sweet against her parched throat. Have you worked at the Triple R long? Going on 5 years now, he replied. Started as a ranch hand, worked my way up to foreman last spring. You must be good with horses. A genuine smile crossed his face. Better with horses than people, some might say. Animals don't lie about their intentions. Unlike men like Harrison Wells, Grace murmured. Some men think having money gives them the right to take whatever they want. Something hardened in Caleb's voice. I've known too many like that. They traveled in companionable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses' hooves and creaking wagon wheels creating a strangely peaceful backdrop to Grace's tumultuous thoughts. The morning sun climbed higher, and she found herself drifting in and out of sleep, exhaustion finally catching up to her. She woke to Caleb gently calling her name. Miss Winters? We're coming into Willow Creek. Grace sat up, wincing at her stiff muscles. The town before them was small but busy, a single main street lined with wooden buildings, horses tied at hitching posts, people moving purposefully along the boardwalks. After days of running through wilderness, the sight of civilization brought both relief and anxiety. Will he look for me here? She wondered aloud. Eventually, Caleb acknowledged. But not today, I reckon. He seemed convinced you were still in those woods. He guided the wagon toward a 2-story building with a sign reading, Mackenzie's General Store and Boarding House. An older woman with silver-streaked hair emerged as they pulled up. Caleb Murphy! Thought you weren't due in town until next week. Change of plans, Mrs. Mackenzie. He jumped down from the wagon, then came around to help Grace. This is Miss Winters. She's had some trouble on the road and needs a place to stay. Mrs. Mackenzie's shrewd eyes took in Grace's torn dress, dirty face, and swollen ankle. Trouble, is it? Well, you've come to the right place, dearie. No one bothers my boarders. I don't have much money, Grace admitted. We'll sort that out, the older woman said firmly. Caleb, bring her inside while I fetch Dr. Collins for that ankle. Grace found herself settled in a clean, simple room at the boarding house, her ankle properly bandaged by the town doctor, a kind elderly man who asked no questions about her injuries. Mrs. Mackenzie provided a bath and a borrowed nightgown, promising to help mend her dress in the morning. After the longest, most luxurious bath of her life, Grace sat on the edge of the narrow bed, combing through her damp hair. A soft knock at the door made her start. Miss Winters? It's Caleb Murphy. She pulled a shawl around her shoulders before opening the door. Caleb stood in the hallway, hat in his hands, looking somewhat uncomfortable. I wanted to make sure you were settled before I headed back to the ranch, he said. You're leaving? Got responsibilities. Cattle don't feed themselves. He shifted his weight. But I spoke with Mrs. Mackenzie. She needs help in the store. Says she can offer room and board plus a small wage if you're interested. Relief washed over Grace. That's very kind. Of both of you. It's temporary, but it'll give you time to figure things out. He hesitated. I also spoke with Sheriff Barnes. Didn't give details, just said a lady might be in trouble. He'll keep an eye out for strangers asking questions. Gratitude swelled in Grace's chest. Mr. Murphy, I don't know how to thank you. Caleb, he corrected gently. And no thanks needed. Anyone would have done the same. But they wouldn't have, Grace knew. Most would have handed her right back to Harrison. I'll be back in town next Saturday for supplies, he continued. If you need anything before then, Mrs. Mackenzie knows how to reach the ranch. After he left, Grace sat by the window, watching as he loaded the last of his supplies and drove the wagon out of town. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe deeply. She was safe for now. The next morning, Grace began her new life in Willow Creek. Mrs. Mackenzie was a fair employer who quickly discovered Grace's talent for numbers. Soon, Grace was keeping the store's books in addition to helping customers and organizing inventory. The work was honest and satisfying, worlds away from the pampered but controlled life she'd led as the daughter of wealthy miner Edward Winters. Here, no one cared about her family name or her father's gold mines. She was judged solely on her willingness to work hard and her kindness to others. Each night, she carefully folded away the store's earnings in the heavy safe, then climbed the stairs to her small room, where she'd take out the deed to her father's land, the proof of her inheritance that Harrison so desperately wanted. Sometimes she considered burning it, erasing the last tie to her old life. But something always stopped her. It was more than a piece of paper. It was her father's legacy. True to his word, Caleb returned the following Saturday. Grace was helping a customer when the bell above the door jingled, and he walked in, removing his hat. Something fluttered in her chest at the sight of him, his tall frame filling the doorway, those blue eyes finding hers immediately. "Miss Winters," he greeted her with a nod. "Good to see you looking better." "Mr. Murphy," she returned with a smile. "Mrs. Mackenzie mentioned you'd be by for supplies. Got the list right here." He patted his vest pocket. "How's the ankle?" "Much improved, thank you." She finished with her customer before turning her full attention to him. "Let me help you gather those supplies." As they moved around the store, Grace found herself watching the careful way he selected each item, examining tools for quality, checking the stitching on a new pair of gloves, smelling the coffee beans before nodding approval. "You're very particular," she observed as he inspected a length of rope. "When you're 20 miles from town and something breaks, being particular beforehand saves a lot of trouble," he replied. "My pa taught me that. Is your father still living?" A shadow crossed his face. "No. Lost both my parents to influenza when I was 19. Been on my own since then." "I'm sorry. I lost my mother when I was 12. My father just last month." She paused, suddenly realizing something. "Though I suppose I've been on my own much less time than you. Doesn't make it any easier," he said quietly. "Loss is loss." There was understanding in his eyes that made Grace feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced before. Not pitted or coveted as Harrison had looked at her, but truly seen. Their conversation was interrupted when the store's door burst open and Sheriff Barnes strode in, his expression grim. "Miss Winters," he said, "might have a situation. Man matching the description of the one Mr. Murphy mentioned was asking about you over in Pine Ridge. Offering a reward for information." Grace's blood ran cold. Pine Ridge was less than a day's ride from Willow Creek. "How much time do we have?" Caleb asked, his hand moving instinctively to Grace's elbow in support. "Hard to say. Could be days, could be tomorrow." The sheriff adjusted his gun belt. "I can keep an eye out, but if he's got papers saying you're his fiancé." He left the implication hanging. "I'm not his fiancé," Grace said firmly. "I never agreed to marry him. My father arranged it before he died, but no contracts were signed. Might not matter much if he's got money and influence," Barnes replied. "Courts tend to favor men in these situations, especially wealthy ones." Caleb's jaw tightened. "There must be something we can do." Mrs. Mackenzie, who had been listening from behind the counter, stepped forward. "She could leave town. Stage comes through tomorrow heading to Denver." "And then what?" Grace asked, fear edging into her voice. "Keep running forever? Harrison won't stop. Not while I have." She trailed off, unwilling to mention the deed in front of others. "While you have what?" Sheriff Barnes asked sharply. "Information," she amended. "About his business dealings. Things he wouldn't want known." The sheriff studied her, then nodded slowly. "Well, that changes things. Man with secrets is a man with vulnerabilities. He's still dangerous," Caleb interjected. "And he'll be looking here next." A tense silence fell over the store. Finally, Caleb spoke again. "Come to the Triple R," he said to Grace. "It's remote, hard to find unless you know the way. You'd be safe there while we figure out a more permanent solution. I couldn't impose, it's not an imposition. We've got a small cabin that used to be the foreman's quarters before the new one was built. It's been sitting empty." His eyes met hers, steady and reassuring. "The ranch owner, Mr. Reynolds, is a good man. He'd understand." Mrs. Mackenzie nodded her approval. "It's a sound plan, dearie. Better than waiting here like a sitting duck. I can spread word that you took the stage east," the sheriff added. "Might buy you some time." Grace looked between them, overwhelmed by their willingness to help her, a virtual stranger. In the privileged world she'd come from, people were always calculating what they could gain from relationships. This simple kindness without expectation of return was new and precious. "All right," she agreed quietly. "When should we leave?" "No," Caleb said firmly. "We'll finish getting these supplies and head out before sundown." An hour later, Grace sat beside Caleb on the wagon seat, a small bundle of belongings at her feet. Mrs. Mackenzie had insisted she take the borrowed clothes, and had pressed a packet of food into her hands. The sheriff promised to keep an eye on Harrison's movements, and send word if necessary. As they left town, Grace cast a glance back at Willow Creek, the place that had briefly been her sanctuary. "Will I ever stop running?" she wondered aloud. "Everyone's running from something," Caleb replied, eyes on the road ahead. "The trick is finding something worth running toward instead." The journey to the Triple R took them through increasingly rugged country, rolling grasslands giving way to pine-covered hills and rocky outcroppings. The main trail eventually became a narrow track, barely visible to untrained eyes. "Mr. Reynolds chose this land for its privacy," Caleb explained as they forded a shallow creek. "He fought in the war between the states. Came west afterward looking for peace and quiet. Did he find it? Mostly." Caleb smiled slightly. "Though his wife might say differently. Martha Reynolds runs the household with military precision. She'll like you, though." "How can you be sure?" "She values honesty and hard work. I've known you less than a week, but those qualities are plain to see." The simple compliment warmed Grace more than it should have. They crested a final ridge as the sun began its descent, revealing a valley spread below them. A collection of buildings nestled against the base of a hill, a large main house, a bunkhouse, barns, and corrals. Cattle dotted the surrounding pastures, and smoke curled from several chimneys. "It's beautiful," Grace breathed. "Home," Caleb said simply, but the pride in his voice was unmistakable. They were greeted in the yard by a tall, silver-haired man with a military bearing and keen eyes. Charles Reynolds welcomed Grace without hesitation after Caleb briefly explained her situation. "Any friend of Caleb's is welcome here," he said, his voice gruff but kind. "My wife's just putting supper on. You'll join us, of course." Martha Reynolds proved to be a formidable woman with a no-nonsense manner that reminded Grace of Mrs. Mackenzie. She asked direct questions but accepted Grace's vague answers about family troubles, without pressing further. After the meal, Caleb showed Grace to the cabin that would be her temporary home. It was small but solidly built, with a stone fireplace, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and a few shelves stocked with basic provisions. "It's not fancy," he apologized, lighting a lamp against the gathering darkness. "It's perfect," Grace assured him, meaning it. After all she'd been through, safety and simplicity were luxuries beyond price. "I'll be in the bunkhouse with the other hands if you need anything," Caleb said, moving to the door. "The main house is just up the path. Martha's usually up before dawn. She'll show you around tomorrow." "Caleb," Grace called as he reached for the latch. He turned, eyebrows raised. "Thank you?" "For everything." He ducked his head slightly, seemingly uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Get some rest, Miss Winters. You're safe here." After he left, Grace sat on the edge of the bed, listening to the unfamiliar night sounds of the ranch, distant lowing of cattle, the occasional whinny of horses, the wind rustling through pine trees. For the first time since fleeing her father's house, she allowed herself to truly relax. The next few days established a routine. Martha put Grace to work immediately, declaring that idle hands lead to troublesome thoughts. Grace helped with cooking, mending, and preserving the garden's late summer harvest. In the afternoons, she often worked on the ranch's account books, which Martha had been managing with increasing frustration. Numbers were never my strong suit, Martha admitted as Grace organized the chaotic ledgers. Charles handles the cattle and the men. I handle everything else. But these books. She shook her head. My father insisted I learn bookkeeping, Grace explained. He said a woman should always understand her financial situation, even if she never needed to manage it herself. Your father sounds like a sensible man. He was, Grace said softly. Until near the end. After he got sick, he made some poor decisions. Like arranging her marriage to Harrison Wells, believing the man's promises to care for her and preserve the family business. Her father had been desperate to secure her future before he died. Instead, he'd nearly condemned her to a life with a murderer. Caleb was often absent during the days, working with the other ranch hands to prepare for the coming winter, mending fences, ensuring adequate hay supplies, and culling the herd. But in the evenings, he frequently stopped by her cabin, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book from the main house library, wildflowers he'd gathered, or once, a jar of honey from a beekeeper who'd passed through the ranch. The men are wondering about you, he mentioned one evening as they sat on the cabin's small porch, watching the sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and purple. What do they think? Some figure you're running from a bad marriage. Others think maybe you witnessed something you shouldn't have. He glanced at her. Reynolds told them you're under his protection. That's all they need to know. Grace stared at the darkening landscape. Both guesses are partly right, she admitted. Harrison Wells courted me after my father fell ill. He seemed kind, attentive. Father thought he would take care of the mining business and me after he was gone. She twisted her hands in her lap. But Harrison only wanted the mines. There's a new vein of gold that my father discovered just before he died. Very few people know about it. And you're one of them. Caleb surmised. She nodded. I overheard them discussing it. Harrison was furious that father hadn't told him sooner. After father died, I found the deed and official claim in his desk. I was going to give it to Harrison until I saw him kill a man who'd apparently discovered the same vein on adjacent property. So that's what he's after. Not just you, but the claim. The deed is legally mine now. Father left everything to me. But Harrison arranged for us to be married just days after the funeral. He was in such a hurry. She shuddered. I realized then what kind of man he truly was. So I took the deed and ran. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. You've been carrying this burden alone. I didn't know who to trust. She looked at him directly. I still don't know if I should be telling you this. I've got no interest in gold mines, Miss Winters. My life is here. His gaze was steady, unflinching. But a man who'd kill for gold won't stop hunting you. Not without good reason. What can I do? I can't keep running forever. No, he agreed. But you need proof of what he did. Without that, it's your word against his. There was a witness, Grace said slowly. A prospector who was camped nearby. He helped me get away that first night. Said his name was Thomas Blackwood. Do you know where he is now? She shook her head. He was heading to a place called Silverton. But that was weeks ago. Silverton's not too far from here. Caleb mused. 3, maybe 4 days' ride. If this Blackwood is still there, his testimony could help. Are you suggesting we go looking for him? I'm suggesting we consider all options before Harrison Wells finds his way to the Triple R. He stood, brushing dust from his trousers. Let me think on it. There might be a way to resolve this without putting you in more danger. As he walked away toward the bunkhouse, Grace watched his retreating figure, struck by the realization that she was no longer alone in her fight. For the first time since her father died, someone was firmly in her corner. The feeling was as unfamiliar as it was comforting. The following day brought a visitor to the ranch, a wiry man named Joshua Parker, who operated the general store in the nearest town, almost 15 miles away. He arrived with mail and news, including word that a well-dressed man had been asking questions about newcomers to the area. Offering good money for information, Parker told them as they gathered in the main house. Showed a photograph of a young woman. Said she was his fiancé, run off after her father's death. Claimed she wasn't right in the head. Grace felt ill. Did you see the photograph? Parker nodded. Pretty lady with dark hair. Fancy dress. His eyes narrowed as he looked more closely at Grace, now dressed in a simple cotton work dress, her hair pulled back in a practical braid. Didn't make the connection until just now, seeing you up close. Did you tell him anything? Charles Reynolds asked sharply. Course not. Parker looked offended. Man had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Reminded me of a rattler about to strike. I said I hadn't seen anyone matching that description, which was God's honest truth at the time. But he'll keep looking, Grace said, her voice hollow. And eventually he'll find someone willing to talk. We need to act, Caleb said, turning to Reynolds. I'd like your permission to take a few days. Ride to Silverton and look for that witness Miss Winters mentioned. Reynolds considered this. Timing's not ideal with winter preparations. But Jackson and Miller can cover your duties. He looked at Grace. Would you go with him? This witness might be more willing to talk if you're there. Grace hadn't considered leaving the safety of the ranch. The idea of being on the road again, where Harrison might find her, was terrifying. But the alternative, waiting for him to track her to the Triple R, was worse. Yes, she agreed quietly. I'll go. Then it's settled, Reynolds said. You'll leave tomorrow at first light. Take the mountain trail, it's less traveled. Parker, not a word about any of this when you return to town. The storekeeper mimed, locking his lips. Never saw the lady. Never had this conversation. That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She packed and repacked her small bag, checked the hiding place where she kept her father's deed, and paced the cabin floor until the boards creaked in protest. Around midnight, a soft knock at her door startled her. Caleb stood outside, a heavy wool coat in his arms. Thought you might need this for the journey, he explained. Nights get cold in the mountains this time of year. Thank you. She accepted the coat, noticing it was far too large for her. Is this yours? It'll keep you warmer than anything you've got. He hesitated. I heard you moving around. Figured you might be worrying about tomorrow. I'm afraid, she admitted. Not just of Harrison finding us, but of not finding Thomas Blackwood. What if he's moved on? What if he won't help me? We'll figure it out, Caleb assured her. One step at a time. Something in his calm confidence steadied her. How do you do that? Do what? Make everything seem manageable. Less frightening. A small smile touched his lips. Years of handling skittish horses, maybe. Problems are like wild colts, they seem biggest when you're backing away from them. Face them straight on, they usually look smaller. Grace laughed softly. I'm not sure if I should be flattered or offended by that comparison. Meant no offense, he said, eyes crinkling with amusement. Just that fear's natural, but it doesn't have to control you. I'll remember that. She clutched the coat to her chest. We should both get some rest. Early start tomorrow. He nodded, touching the brim of his hat. Good night, Miss Winters. Grace, she corrected impulsively. Please call me Grace. Good night, Grace, he said, her name sounding different in his deep voice. Sleep well. They set out before dawn, riding horses instead of taking the wagon for speed and maneuverability. Grace was grateful for her childhood riding lessons as they navigated increasingly difficult terrain. Caleb set a steady pace, occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife as they traveled. By midday, they had climbed high enough that the Triple R was no longer visible behind them. The trail narrowed, winding through pine forests and skirting steep drops that made Grace's stomach lurch. Caleb rode ahead, occasionally glancing back to check on her. "You ride well," he commented during a brief rest. "Most city folks struggle with mountain trails. My mother insisted on proper riding lessons," Grace explained, stretching her sore muscles. "Though we usually stuck to groomed paths in the park, not," she gestured to the rugged landscape around them. "This. Your mother sounds formidable." "She was." Grace smiled at the memory. "Beautiful, refined, but with an iron will. She married beneath her station. My father was just a clerk when they met. Her family disowned her, but she never regretted it." The smile faded. "After she died, father threw himself into the mining business. That's when he struck gold." "And that's when the troubles started?" Caleb guessed. Grace nodded. "Money changes things. People look at you differently. Not always for the better," he agreed, helping her back onto her horse. "Come on. There's a trapper's cabin about 2 hours from here where we can spend the night." The cabin, when they reached it, was little more than a one-room shelter with a stone fireplace and dirt floor. But it was solid, the roof didn't leak, and there was a stack of firewood beside the hearth. "Reynolds has an arrangement with the trapper," Caleb explained as he built a fire. "Ranch hands use it sometimes when working this far out. We leave it better than we found it." Grace helped unpack their provisions, laying out a simple meal of jerky, hard biscuits, and dried apples. As night fell, the temperature dropped dramatically. Despite the fire, she found herself shivering. Caleb noticed immediately. "Here," he said, pulling a bedroll from his pack and spreading it near the fire. "Take my blanket too." "Then what will you use?" "I'll be fine." He settled himself against the wall, tipping his hat over his eyes. "Get some sleep. We've got a long ride tomorrow." Grace tried to rest, but the hard ground and her racing thoughts kept her awake. After an hour of restless turning, she heard Caleb shift. "Can't sleep?" he asked softly. "No." She sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Too much on my mind. Want to talk about it." She stared into the dying fire. "I keep thinking about choices. How one decision can change everything. Like running from Harrison Wells? Like agreeing to marry him in the first place," she corrected. "I knew something wasn't right. But I wanted to please my father. He was so sick, so worried about leaving me alone." She sighed. "I should have trusted my instincts." "Hindsight makes geniuses of us all," Caleb said gently. "You can't blame yourself for trying to honor your father's wishes." "What about you?" she asked, changing the subject. "Any choices you regret?" He was quiet so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I was engaged once. To a banker's daughter in Denver." The revelation surprised her. "What happened?" "I couldn't give her the life she wanted. She needed fine things, city comforts. I needed open skies and honest work." His voice held no bitterness. "We parted ways before either of us made promises we couldn't keep." "Do you ever wonder what might have been?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "But wondering doesn't change what is." "And what is?" He looked around the simple cabin. "Suits me just fine." Grace studied him in the firelight, this man who seemed so content with his place in the world. So different from Harrison, who was always grasping for more, or even her father, driven by ambition until the end. "I don't know what kind of life I want anymore," she confessed. "Everything I thought I knew has changed." "You'll figure it out," he said with quiet certainty. "One day at a time." They reached Silverton late the next afternoon, a bustling mining town nestled in a high mountain valley. Buildings lined the main street, from rough saloons to more respectable establishments. The constant sound of stamp mills crushing ore created a rhythmic backdrop to the town's activity. "Where do we start looking for Thomas Blackwood?" Grace asked as they secured their horses at the livery stable. "Miners need supplies, drink, and sometimes medical attention, Caleb reasoned. Let's try the general store first, then the saloon. If those don't pan out, the doctor might know of him. The general store proprietor recognized the name immediately. Blackwood? Sure, he comes in every couple weeks. Independent prospector, works a claim up French Creek. Any idea when he'll be in town next? Caleb asked. The man scratched his beard. He mentioned needing blasting powder. Might be in tomorrow or the next day. We'll check back, Caleb promised. If you see him, tell him Grace Winters is looking for him. It's important. They secured rooms at the town's modest hotel, adjacent rooms with a connecting door at Grace's insistence. After weeks of running, she was reluctant to be completely alone in an unfamiliar place. We'll have supper at the hotel dining room, Caleb suggested. Less chance of running into trouble than at the saloon. Over a surprisingly good meal of venison stew and fresh bread, they discussed their next steps. If Blackwood doesn't show up tomorrow, we could try finding his claim, Grace suggested. Caleb shook his head. Too risky. These mountains are treacherous if you don't know them well. And miners don't take kindly to strangers near their claims. Then we wait, she said, trying to hide her disappointment. Every day delayed was another day Harrison might find her trail. Caleb seemed to read her thoughts. We'll give it 2 days. If he doesn't show by then, we'll try another approach. After dinner, they retired to their rooms. Grace sat on the edge of her bed, listening to Caleb moving about next door. The connecting door remained closed, but knowing he was just on the other side brought comfort. She was brushing her hair when a sharp knock came at her main door. Freezing mid-stroke, she listened as the knock repeated, more insistent this time. Miss Winters? An unfamiliar male voice called. Message for you at the front desk. Grace's heart pounded. No one knew she was here. No one should be leaving messages. Moving silently to the connecting door, she tapped lightly. Caleb opened it immediately, already alert to the situation. Someone's at my door, she whispered. Says there's a message for me downstairs. His expression hardened. Stay here, he murmured, pulling his revolver from its holster. He moved through her room to the main door, positioning himself to the side before calling out. Who's there? Billy, sir. From the front desk. Got a telegram from Miss Winters. Caleb glanced at Grace, who shook her head slightly. She hadn't told anyone where they were going. Slide it under the door, Caleb directed, guns still ready. After a moment's hesitation, a folded paper appeared beneath the door. Caleb retrieved it without exposing himself, then waited until footsteps retreated down the hall before examining it. It's not a telegram, he said grimly, showing Grace the note. In a rough scrawl it read, T. Blackwood at Miners' Rest Saloon. Asking for you. It could be a trap, Grace whispered. Could be, Caleb agreed. But we need to find out. I'll go. You stay here, door locked. No, she said firmly. If it's really Thomas, he knows me. He might not talk to you alone. And if it's not Thomas? If it's one of Harrison's men? Then I'd rather face that with you than wait here wondering. She straightened her shoulders. I'm tired of hiding, Caleb. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Stay close to me. We go in, assess the situation, and leave at the first sign of trouble. The Miners' Rest Saloon was crowded and noisy, thick with tobacco smoke and the smell of cheap whiskey. Caleb entered first, scanning the room while keeping Grace partially behind him. Men glanced their way. A woman in a saloon who wasn't working there drew attention, but most returned to their drinks after a curious look. There, Grace whispered, spotting a familiar figure at a corner table. That's him. Thomas Blackwood was a weathered man in his 50s, with a gray-streaked beard and the leathery skin of someone who spent his life outdoors. He looked up as they approached, recognition flashing in his eyes. Miss Winters, he said, rising from his chair. Wasn't sure my message would find you. How did you know I was here? Grace asked as they sat down. Overheard the store owner telling his wife a lady was looking for me. Description matched. He glanced at Caleb. Who's your friend? Caleb Murphy. Caleb introduced himself. I work at the Triple R Ranch near Willow Creek. Blackwood nodded slowly. You're a long way from home, Miss Winters. That man still after you? Yes, Grace confirmed. Harrison Wells. He's been tracking me since I fled. Mr. Blackwood, I need your help. You saw what happened that night. I saw a cold-blooded killing, the older man said grimly. Saw Wells shoot Jacob Miller in the back over a claim dispute. Would you be willing to testify to that? Before a judge or sheriff? Blackwood looked uncomfortable. I'm a simple man, Miss Winters. Don't much like getting involved in other folks' troubles. This is more than trouble, Caleb interjected. A woman's life is at stake. Her future, at least. Wells is a powerful man, Blackwood argued. Has friends in high places. My word against his wouldn't count for much. It would if we had evidence, Grace said, leaning forward. Something to support your testimony. What kind of evidence? Grace hesitated, glancing at Caleb. The murder weapon, Caleb suggested. Or documentation of the claim dispute. Blackwood scratched his beard thoughtfully. Miller kept papers in his cabin. Deeds, maps, correspondence. Don't know if they're still there. Where is this cabin? Grace asked. About 10 miles northeast of your father's main property. Hidden in a stand of pines. He took a scrap of paper from his pocket and sketched a crude map. Here. But I wouldn't go there if I were you. Too dangerous. More dangerous than waiting for Harrison to find me? Grace countered. The lady has a point, Caleb said. If those papers could prove motive. Blackwood sighed heavily. Look, I'll tell what I saw to any lawman who asks. But I won't go back there. I've got my own claim to protect. That's all we ask, Grace assured him, touching his weathered hand gratefully. Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. You may have saved my life twice now. As they left the saloon, Caleb kept a protective hand at Grace's elbow, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The streets of Silverton were darker now, the businesses closing for the night. What do you think? Grace asked when they were safely back in her hotel room. Is it worth going to Miller's cabin? It's risky, Caleb admitted. But if there's evidence they're connecting Wells to the murder or the claim dispute, it could be what we need. He studied the crude map. This isn't far from where we found you. 2 days' ride from here, maybe 3. Then we should go, Grace said decisively. Tomorrow morning. Grace. Caleb's voice softened. You understand what we'd be doing? Riding directly toward the danger you've been running from. I understand, she said, meeting his concerned gaze. But I can't keep running forever, Caleb. Sooner or later, I have to stand and fight. The determination in her eyes stirred something in him. Without thinking, he reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. The touch was light, almost reverent. You're the bravest woman I've ever known, he said quietly. Grace's breath caught at the tenderness in his voice. For a heartbeat, they stood there, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Caleb stepped back, clearing his throat. We should get some rest, he said. Dawn comes early. But rest didn't come easily for Grace that night. Her mind kept returning to that moment, the warmth of Caleb's fingers against her cheek, the look in his eyes. In the midst of danger and uncertainty, something new was blossoming between them. Something that both thrilled and terrified her. They left Silverton at first light, taking a different route than the one they'd arrived on. Caleb led them through high mountain passes and dense forests, always alert for signs of other travelers. By midday, they had descended into a valley that Grace recognized with a jolt of memory. My father's property begins just beyond that ridge, she said, pointing to a distant line of hills. The main house is about 5 miles in that direction. And Miller's cabin? Caleb asked. She consulted Blackwood's map. Northeast from here. If we follow this creek upstream, we should find it. The path grew more difficult as they continued, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses through rocky terrain. By late afternoon, they reached a small clearing nestled among towering pines. A crude log cabin stood at its center, the door hanging askew on leather hinges. "Stay back," Caleb warned, drawing his revolver as they approached. "Let me check inside first." The cabin's interior was dim and musty, disturbed only by small creatures that had taken up residence in the absent owner's home. A rough table, a bed frame with a rotted mattress, and a stone fireplace were the only furnishings. Papers and books lay scattered across the floor, some water damaged from rain that had leaked through the roof. "Someone's been here before us," Caleb observed, holstering his weapon. "Search the place from the looks of it." Grace knelt, gathering some of the papers. "These are survey maps," she said, examining them. "And here correspondence with the land office about extending his claim. Any mention of wells?" She shuffled through more documents. "Not yet, but wait." She pulled out a leather-bound journal from beneath a fallen shelf. "This is Miller's diary." They sat together at the table as Grace carefully turned the journal's damp pages. Much of the writing was mundane daily records of mining work, weather observations, supply lists. But as they reached entries from 2 months earlier, the tone changed. "Listen to this," Grace said, reading aloud. "June 12, 1876. Made an extraordinary discovery today in the North Tunnel. Richest vein I've ever seen. Must keep this quiet until I can file the proper extensions. Wells has been watching my claim too closely for comfort." She turned more pages. June 20th. Wells visited again. Offered to buy me out at a ridiculous price. When I refused, he made veiled threats about claim jumpers and accidents. "I'm sleeping with my rifle now." "This establishes motive," Caleb said. "But we need something that places him at the scene of the murder." Grace continued reading, her voice growing tighter as the entries became more alarming. Miller's paranoia increased with each page, his handwriting deteriorating as he described Wells's increasing hostility. The final entry, dated just 2 days before Grace had witnessed the murder, sent a chill through her. July 8th. Wells came with 2 men today. Said this was my last chance to sell willingly. When I refused, he said I'd regret my stubbornness. I've moved my most important papers to the hiding place beneath the hearthstone. If anything happens to me, let the record show that Harrison Wells is responsible. The hearthstone, Caleb said immediately, moving to the fireplace. "Help me check for loose stones." They worked together, probing the rough stone hearth until Grace found one that shifted slightly under pressure. "Here." Caleb helped her pry it up, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside was a tin box, which Grace carefully extracted. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were several folded documents: the deed to Miller's claim, a hand-drawn map showing the location of the gold vein, and a sealed envelope addressed to the proper authorities. Grace broke the seal and read the letter inside aloud. It was Miller's sworn statement detailing Harrison's threats and attempts to force him off his claim, concluding with the chilling declaration that if he were found dead, Harrison Wells should be held accountable. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what we needed." Caleb's expression was grim but satisfied. "With this and Blackwood's testimony, Wells won't be able to hide behind his money and influence. We need to get these to Sheriff Barnes in Willow Creek," Grace said, carefully returning the documents to the tin box. "We'll head back first thing tomorrow," Caleb agreed. "It's too late to start now. We should make camp here for the night." As darkness fell, they secured the horses and prepared a small fire in the cabin's hearth. They ate a simple meal from their provisions, the gravity of their discovery lending a solemn atmosphere to their conversation. "What will you do after?" Caleb asked as they sat side by side before the fire. "When this is over?" Grace hadn't allowed herself to think that far ahead. "I don't know," she admitted. "My father's property is valuable, but I have no desire to run a mining operation." "You could sell it." "Perhaps. She stared into the flames. But then what? Return to Denver society? That life feels hollow now. You could stay in Willow Creek, Caleb suggested, his voice carefully neutral. Mrs. Mackenzie would be glad to have you back. Grace turned to look at him, reading the unspoken question in his eyes. Is that what you want? For me to stay in Willow Creek? I want you to be happy, he said simply. Safe. Free to choose your own path. And if that path led to the Triple R? She asked softly. The firelight caught the hope that flared in his eyes. Then I'd say the Triple R would be lucky to have you. Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first day on the forest road. Caleb reached for her hand, his callous fingers entwining with hers. Grace, he began, his voice rough with emotion. A sound outside the cabin silenced him. A horse's whinny, quickly hushed. Then the crunch of boots on pine needles. They froze, eyes locked in sudden alarm. Someone was outside, someone trying to move quietly. Caleb extinguished the lamp with a quick breath, plunging the cabin into darkness broken only by the dim glow of coals in the fireplace. He drew his revolver, motioning for Grace to stay low. Could be just a traveler, he whispered, though his expression said he didn't believe it. Or Harrison, Grace breathed. A voice called from outside, confirming their fears. Grace? I know you're in there. Come out now, and no one needs to get hurt. Harrison Wells. The smooth, cultured voice that had once charmed her now sent ice through her veins. Back door? Caleb mouthed silently. Grace shook her head. There was only the one entrance. I just want to talk. Harrison called again. About your father's property. About our future together. Caleb moved to the window, peering cautiously through a crack in the shutters. 3 men, he whispered. Wells and 2 others. Armed. What do we do? Grace clutched the tin box to her chest. Hide these, Caleb instructed, indicating the documents. Then stay down. I'll try to talk to him. He'll kill you, she protested. Not if he thinks I'm alone. Caleb's eyes were resolute. Hide, Grace. No matter what you hear, stay hidden until it's safe. Before she could argue further, Caleb moved to the door. Wells, he called. The lady doesn't want to see you. Ride on and there won't be trouble. A laugh answered him. And who might you be? Name's Murphy. Caleb Murphy. Well, Mr. Murphy, you're interfering in private matters. Miss Winters is my fiancé. She's been unwell since her father's death. I'm simply bringing her home where she belongs. Funny thing, Caleb replied, his voice deceptively casual. She tells a different story. Says you're more interested in her father's gold than in her welfare. A tense silence followed. When Harrison spoke again, the false charm had vanished from his voice. Send her out now, or we burn the cabin with both of you inside. Grace, who had been hiding the documents beneath a loose floorboard, felt her blood run cold. She couldn't let Caleb face this danger alone, not for her sake. Moving silently to his side, she squeezed his arm in silent communication. He glanced down at her, eyes widening in alarm, but she shook her head slightly. She had a plan. Harrison, she called. I'll come out. But only to talk. You and me alone. Grace, no, Caleb whispered fiercely. Trust me, she murmured back. Wise decision. Harrison's voice carried a note of triumph. Come out slowly, both of you. Hands where we can see them. Grace took a deep breath, then opened the cabin door. The moonlight revealed Harrison Wells standing in the clearing, flanked by 2 rough-looking men with rifles. He was as handsome as ever in his tailored suit, but now she could see the coldness in his eyes that she'd overlooked before. There you are, my dear, he said, smiling thinly. You've led me on quite a chase. It wasn't meant to be a game, Harrison, she replied, stepping forward with Caleb close behind her. Of course not. Games are for children, and we're discussing serious matters. His gaze flicked to Caleb. Your friend can leave now. This is between us. He stays, Grace said firmly. Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of him. Harrison's smile tightened. Very well. I'll be direct. You have something that belongs to me. The deed to your father's property, with the new claim extension. I want it. It doesn't belong to you, Grace countered. It's my inheritance. An inheritance you're ill-equipped to manage, Harrison said dismissively. Your father understood that. It's why he arranged our marriage. My father didn't know you as well as he thought, Grace replied. He didn't know you were willing to kill for gold. A dangerous light flashed in Harrison's eyes. Careful, Grace. Such accusations are slanderous. Not when they're true, she said. Not when there's proof. That caught his attention. What proof? Jacob Miller's journal. His sworn statement naming you as his likely murderer if he turned up dead. The same statement now in the hands of the territorial authorities. The lie came easily, fueled by her determination to protect herself and Caleb. Uncertainty flickered across Harrison's face. You're bluffing. Am I? Grace forced herself to smile confidently. Why do you think we came here? We've already found what we needed and sent it on to Willow Creek. By now, Sheriff Barnes will have contacted the federal marshal. The two men flanking Harrison exchanged uneasy glances. Even if that were true, Harrison said carefully, it would be one man's word against mine. And I have many friends in important positions. And witnesses, Grace added. Thomas Blackwood saw you shoot Miller in the back. He's given his statement as well. This was the gamble. Harrison didn't know they'd already found Blackwood. Didn't know the prospector had agreed to testify. Harrison's composure slipped further. Blackwood is a drunken fool. No one would believe him. They'll believe him when his testimony matches the evidence in Miller's own hand, Caleb interjected. Game's over, Wells. Best you can do now is run. Get as far from Colorado territory as you can before the law catches up. The hired guns were looking increasingly uncomfortable. One of them leaned toward Harrison, muttering something Grace couldn't hear. Harrison's face darkened with fury. For a moment, Grace thought he might order his men to shoot regardless of consequences. Then, abruptly, his expression smoothed into cold calculation. This isn't finished, he said to Grace. I'll be back for what's mine. It was never yours, she replied steadily. And you won't find me so easy to intimidate next time. With a curt nod to his men, Harrison turned and strode back to his horse. The three mounted and rode away, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. Grace's knees nearly buckled with relief. Caleb caught her arm, supporting her weight as they retreated into the cabin and secured the door. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen, he said, his voice shaking slightly. He could have killed us both. But he didn't, Grace pointed out. He's a businessman, Caleb. When the risks outweigh the potential profit, he backs away. For now, Caleb warned. But he won't go far. Not until he's sure we're telling the truth about the evidence. Then we need to leave immediately, Grace said, retrieving the tin box from its hiding place. Get these documents to Sheriff Barnes before Harrison realizes we bluffed about already sending them. It's dangerous to travel at night in these mountains. More dangerous to wait until morning, she insisted. Harrison might decide his reputation is worth more than gold. Caleb recognized the determination in her eyes and nodded. Pack only what we need. We'll travel light and fast. Within minutes they had saddled the horses and were moving silently through the forest, following a different route than the one they'd arrived on. The moon provided just enough light to navigate, though they were forced to proceed slowly through the rough terrain. Grace's mind raced as they rode. Harrison wouldn't give up easily, not with so much at stake. Even if they reached Willow Creek with the evidence, he might still find ways to discredit it or them. Men like Harrison Wells didn't face consequences the way ordinary people did. After several hours of tense riding, they stopped to rest the horses beside a small stream. The eastern sky was beginning to lighten, promising dawn within the hour. "We should reach the main trail by mid-morning," Caleb said, keeping his voice low despite the empty wilderness around them. "From there, it's a straight shot to Willow Creek." "Do you think he's following us?" Grace asked. "Probably," Caleb admitted. "But we've got a head start, and he doesn't know these mountains like I do." Grace pulled the coat Caleb had loaned her tighter around her shoulders. Despite the physical discomfort of their journey, she felt strangely calm. For the first time since fleeing her father's house, she wasn't simply running away from danger, she was moving toward a solution. "What you said back there," Caleb began hesitantly. "About staying in Willow Creek. Maybe at the Triple R." Grace looked up at him, seeing vulnerability in his usually confident expression. "I meant it," she said softly. "If you meant your response." He moved closer, taking her cold hands in his. "I meant every word," he said. "Grace, I know it's fast. We've only known each other a short while. But I've never met anyone like you, brave, determined, kind despite everything you've been through." "Caleb," she whispered, her heart thundering in her chest. "I'm not a wealthy man," he continued earnestly. "Can't offer you the kind of life you had before. But I can promise to stand beside you, whatever comes. To build something steady together." Tears pricked at Grace's eyes. After months of uncertainty and fear, the sincerity in his voice offered something she'd begun to think impossible, a future she could believe in. "I don't want my old life," she told him. "I want one that's real. With someone who sees me for who I am, not what I own." His smile transformed his face, erasing the worry lines that had been his constant companion during their journey. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, then deepened as Grace responded, her hands moving to his shoulders. In that moment, the danger surrounding them seemed to recede, leaving only this connection, this promise of something worth fighting for. When they finally parted, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "We should keep moving," he murmured regretfully. "Yes," she agreed, though she made no immediate move to step away. "But when this is over." "When this is over," he echoed. "We'll have all the time in the world." They reached Willow Creek the following afternoon, exhausted but triumphant. Sheriff Barnes received them in his office, listening gravely as they recounted their discoveries and the confrontation with Harrison Wells. "These documents are compelling," he acknowledged, examining Miller's sworn statement. "Combined with Blackwood's testimony, if he'll actually appear in court, we might have enough to arrest Wells." "Might?" Grace questioned, dismayed. "Wells has powerful friends," Barnes reminded her. "And money buys a lot of influence in the courts." "So he gets away with murder?" Caleb asked, anger edging his voice. The sheriff sighed heavily. "I didn't say that." "I'll send these to the federal marshal in Denver immediately. In the meantime, Miss Winters remains in danger. Wells knows where to find her now." "She'll stay at the Triple R," Caleb said firmly. "Reynolds will ensure her safety." "A wise precaution," Barnes agreed. "I'll send word when I hear from the marshal." Mrs. Mackenzie insisted they stay the night at her boarding house before returning to the ranch. "You both look dead on your feet," she declared. "A hot meal and proper rest before you go anywhere else." Over supper in the boarding house kitchen, Grace and Caleb shared a censored version of their journey with Mrs. Mackenzie, emphasizing their success in finding evidence against Harrison while downplaying the danger they'd faced. "Well, I'm glad you're both back in one piece," the older woman said, eyeing them knowingly. "And perhaps with more than just evidence to show for your trouble?" Grace felt her cheeks warm as Caleb's hand found hers beneath the table. "Perhaps," she admitted. Mrs. Mackenzie's smile was both approving and smug. "About time. I told Martha Reynolds weeks ago that you two would make a fine match." "You did what?" Caleb asked, looking startled. "Oh, please. Anyone with eyes could see which way the wind was blowing. She rose from the table, gathering empty plates. Now off to bed, both of you. Separate beds, she added pointedly. I run a respectable establishment. The following morning they returned to the Triple R, where Charles and Martha Reynolds welcomed them with open arms and considerable curiosity. After hearing their full story, Reynolds reinforced security at the ranch, posting men at the main approach and establishing regular patrols of the property's boundaries. No one gets near this ranch without us knowing about it, he assured Grace. You're safe here. Days passed with no word from Sheriff Barnes. Grace settled back into ranch life, helping Martha with household management and continuing to organize the ranch's accounts. In the evenings, she and Caleb would often sit on the porch of her cabin, talking about everything and nothing as they watched the sunset paint the valley. Sometimes he would tell her stories of his childhood in Missouri, of learning ranching from his father, of his dreams to someday have a spread of his own. Other times they would simply sit in comfortable silence, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him. I could get used to this, she told him one evening as they watched the first stars appear in the darkening sky. The quiet. The simplicity. Even without all the comforts you had before? He asked. What comforts? She smiled up at him. Fine dresses that I couldn't breathe in. Social calls to people I barely knew and certainly didn't like? Constant worry about saying the wrong thing or associating with the wrong people? She shook her head. That wasn't comfort, Caleb. It was a beautiful cage. He kissed her then, a tender affirmation of understanding. When they parted, he kept her close, his expression turning serious. I've been thinking, he began, about the future. Our future. Grace's heart quickened. Have you? Reynolds has offered me a partnership in the ranch, he said. A small share now, with the opportunity to increase it over time. With my savings and... He hesitated. If you were willing to invest some of your inheritance, we could build something substantial. Together. Are you proposing a business arrangement, Caleb Murphy? She teased gently. His answering smile was warm with affection. I'm proposing whatever you'll accept. Marriage. Partnership. A life built on something steady and true. Yes, she said simply. To all of it. Joy blazed across his face as he pulled her into his arms, lifting her off her feet in an exuberant embrace that left her laughing breathlessly. When he set her down, he framed her face with his hands, his expression one of wonder. I love you, Grace Winters, he said, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. Have since the moment you came running out of those woods, I think. I love you too, she whispered, marveling at how natural the words felt. How right. Their celebration was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Immediately alert, Caleb positioned himself in front of Grace as one of the ranch hands galloped into view. Riders coming, the young man called. Sheriff Barnes and 3 others. Relief replaced alarm as they hurried to the main house. Barnes dismounted in the yard, his expression unreadable as he greeted them. Miss Winters, Mr. Murphy. He nodded. I've news from Denver. The marshal? Grace asked anxiously. Better, Barnes replied with satisfaction. The marshal and a federal judge. Wells has been arrested. The words took a moment to register. Arrested? Already? Caleb asked. Turns out Miller wasn't his first victim, Barnes explained. Once word got out about the investigation, others came forward. Former business partners, claim holders who'd been forced out. The evidence was overwhelming. So it's over? Grace could hardly believe it. He'll face trial? He'll hang, Barnes said bluntly. No amount of money or influence can save him now. The reality of it washed over Grace like a cleansing rain. Harrison Wells would never threaten her again. Never hurt anyone else. The nightmare that had begun with her father's death was finally ending. There's more, Barnes continued. The judge reviewed your father's will and the mining claim. Everything was left to you free and clear. You're a wealthy woman, Miss Winters. Grace felt Caleb stiffen slightly beside her. She reached for his hand, squeezing it reassuringly. "That's good news," she said carefully, "though it doesn't change my plans." "Which are?" Barnes asked. She looked up at Caleb, seeing uncertainty in his eyes despite his attempt to hide it. "To build a life here," she said clearly, "with the man I love." The tension drained from Caleb's shoulders, replaced by a smile that reached his eyes. Sheriff Barnes glanced between them, understanding dawning on his weathered face. "Well now," he said with gruff approval. "That's fine news indeed." 1 month later, Grace stood before the small church in Willow Creek, wearing a simple white dress that Martha Reynolds had helped her sew. The building was filled with well-wishers: the Reynolds, Mrs. Mackenzie, ranch hands from the R, and townspeople who had embraced her as one of their own. At the altar waited Caleb, looking both nervous and elated in his best suit, Charles Reynolds standing proud beside him as best man. When the music began, Mrs. Mackenzie's niece playing the church's old piano, Grace walked down the aisle alone, carrying a bouquet of wild flowers gathered that morning. "Dearly beloved," the minister began once she reached Caleb's side, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." As they exchanged vows, Grace felt the last shadows of her old life falling away. The words they spoke were traditional, but the promises behind them were uniquely theirs to stand together through whatever life brought, to build something lasting from the foundation of their love. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." Caleb's kiss was tender but full of promise, drawing cheers and applause from their assembled friends. As they turned to face the congregation, Grace caught sight of Thomas Blackwood standing near the back, his weathered face creased in a rare smile. He tipped his hat to her in silent acknowledgement before slipping out the door. The celebration continued at the R, where tables had been set up in the yard and a feast prepared under Martha's exacting supervision. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the valley, Caleb led Grace away from the festivities toward a ridge overlooking the property. "I have something to show you," he said, excitement evident in his voice. They crested the hill to find a cabin larger and more carefully constructed than her temporary home, but with the same simple charm. A wide porch wrapped around the front, and smoke curled from the stone chimney. "Caleb," she breathed. "When did you?" "Been working on it whenever I could steal time," he admitted. "The men helped. Reynolds, too." "It's not finished inside yet, but—" "It's perfect," she interrupted, tears of joy filling her eyes. "Absolutely perfect." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them gazing at their future home. "I thought we'd start with this," he murmured against her hair. "Then maybe add on as needed. For children, someday." "Children," she repeated softly, leaning back against his solid strength. "A family. Our family," he affirmed. "Built on something steady. Something that'll last." As twilight deepened around them, Grace turned in her husband's arms, remembering the terrified woman who had fled through the wilderness months ago. She had been running then from danger, from pain, from a future being forced upon her. Now she was running towards something instead, a life of her own choosing, with a man who loved her for herself, not her inheritance. A life built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and a love that had blossomed in the most unexpected circumstances. "Happy?" Caleb asked, reading the emotions crossing her face. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. His smile was everything warmth and promise and steadfast devotion. As he lowered his lips to hers once more, Grace knew with absolute certainty that whatever challenges life might bring, they would face them together. The running was over. She was finally, truly home. 5 years later, Grace sat on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching as Caleb lifted their 3-year-old daughter onto her first pony. Little Emma's delighted laughter carried across the yard as her father led the gentle creature in a slow circle. "Careful, darling," Grace called, shifting their infant son in her arms. "Hold the reins just like Papa showed you." "I am, Mama!" Emma called back, her face alight with pride. Look at me! I see you, sweetheart, Grace assured her. You're doing wonderfully. Caleb glanced up, catching Grace's eye with a smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. The Triple R had prospered under their joint stewardship after Charles Reynolds retired last year, turning the operation over to them and a few other selected partners. The original cabin was now the centerpiece of a comfortable home, expanded to accommodate their growing family. Grace had used a portion of her inheritance to improve the ranch, modernizing equipment, breeding better stock, and establishing a reputation for quality that brought buyers from as far as Denver. The rest she had placed in trust for their children and contributed to the town's development, helping fund a proper school and a small hospital. Harrison Wells was a distant memory now, his name rarely spoken. He had hanged for his crimes 3 months after their wedding, his empire dismantled and distributed among those he had wronged. Grace had attended the execution, not out of vengeance but to witness the closing of that dark chapter in her life. Now, as she watched her husband and daughter, with her son warm in her arms and another child growing beneath her heart, Grace marveled at how completely her life had transformed. From terrified heiress to confident rancher's wife and business partner. From lonely daughter to beloved mother. From a woman running from a man who took everything to a woman embraced by a love built on something steady and true. Caleb concluded Emma's riding lesson and lifted her from the pony's back, swinging her through the air as she squealed with delight. He carried her up the porch steps, dropping a kiss on Grace's forehead before settling beside her. Another natural-born rider in the family, he announced proudly. Like her father, Grace agreed, leaning against his shoulder. And stubborn like her mother, he added with a grin, earning a playful swat from his wife. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across their land, Emma curled up in her father's lap while baby James dozed against Grace's breast. The evening breeze carried the scent of pine and distant rain, promising the gentle summer shower that would nourish their gardens and pastures. I was thinking, Caleb said softly, mindful of the drowsing children, about that first day, when you came running out of the forest. What about it? Grace asked, though she knew exactly what day he meant. The day everything changed. Just that I never imagined where that moment would lead, he said, his voice rich with contentment. How one decision to stop and help someone would bring me everything I never knew I wanted. Grace smiled, remembering her own desperation that day. How she had seen his wagon as merely a means of escape, never dreaming the quiet cowboy would become the center of her world. I think I knew, she admitted. Not consciously, perhaps. But something in me recognized something in you, even then. Something steady. Something true. He took her free hand, pressing a kiss to her palm in a gesture that had become his own private language of affection over the years. I love you, Grace Murphy, he said. More with each passing day. And I love you, she returned, the words as fresh and meaningful as the first time she'd spoken them. Today, tomorrow, and all the days that follow. As twilight settled over their home, Grace looked out at the land they had nurtured together, at the life they had built from courage and determination and unwavering love. It wasn't the future she had been raised to expect, but it was infinitely more precious for being chosen rather than imposed. A life not of running from fear, but of moving steadily forward. Together.